MCKK. One. Yeah. And on this side, yeah. DJ1. DJ1. Damansara. Yes. Alright, welcome everybody to prelim round 2 of ASDC 2014. Alright, on the motion, this house will ban all media reporting on suicide and government. We have MCKK 1, with the opposition MIDP 1. Alright, so without any further ado, we call the Prime Minister to take the floor. Here.
I think the media and status quo has already gone to a state where it is uncontrollable. exactly what happens at the status quo, where it defends or glorifies the whole idea of suicide in the first place. It doesn't necessarily mean each and every media glorifies suicide, but the existence of this media uncontrollably relying on this information just to gain profit or just to gain this form of ideas or to promote this form of ideas to society, we believe it's very harmful in today's debate. We believe the government stands for the best interests of the society, but let us look in the problem of in the status quo. We believe once you do allow this media to actually report on suicides so much that it is uncontrollable, we believe it has contributed to the elevation of suicidal cases in the first place. We do believe that there are numerous other factors that contribute to this, but we believe if we do mitigate and deal with one of these factors, we believe we can contribute in the reduction of suicidal cases. Secondly, the problem in status quo is how this media is influenced or coerced to actually glorify this form of information just to gain public interest. Sit down, guys, I'm not finished yet. Thirdly, on the reporting of deaths of these people without really concerning to the family of these people in the first place. Sit down. First of all, the whole idea of reporting isn't really serving the purpose of rights towards information. We believe it has gone to a whole different level when this media is actually reporting for the sake of reporting itself and not really letting the society actually know what are the consequences of this media. If we want to, the nature should be about the media reporting to at least increase awareness, but we don't think so. It has transformed to a status quo, to a media which actually portrays this form of information just to harm these mindsets of these people. Before moving on to the three roles I have today, yes?
If the media really covers things for public attention, don't you think there will be public scrutiny if you openly lie, which is against the Constitution, and then you lose your followers, you lose money, you lose leverage?
We don't think so, because media doesn't rely only on suicidal cases to gain public interest in the first place. And secondly, media shouldn't only rely on this public case in these suicidal cases in the first place just to gain media attention in the first place. You have to prove to me what is the importance of having the information in the first place. Opposition has to prove three things. Firstly, the benefits of reporting the suicidal cases in the first place. Secondly, why people need to know about these reports. And thirdly, what are the harms of banning media in the first place. The first role I have to you is why is it okay to restrict the rights of information towards this kind of information. The first level of analysis is these rights are never absolute. But before we move on any further, let us recognize the harms of actually committing suicides and the exclusive harms that comes throughout committing suicide. Three harms. Firstly, you inflict excessive harms to yourself. Once you do actually limit your own life in the first place, once you do commit a suicide, you do end your life. Second harm, it harms your own dignity as a human being. The fact that you have your rights and you abuse those rights to live in the first place, therefore it harms your dignity as a whole. Sit down. Third harm is how that it creates a stereotype of how to get out of your problem instantly. Because it's that instant gratification that you want once you do actually get infected or get afflicted by a problem in status quo, such as stress or whatsoever, such as depression. We believe this suicide is only a gateway to get out of this problem, and this is the easiest way to do. What are the harms of media reporting this in the first place? This form of harms, this form of media actually coerces these people to do these certain harms and to go through these certain harms in the first place. You at least push them, especially to those people in the grey area, to actually be influenced by these ideologies of this media in the first place. When you report on suicide, it doesn't necessarily mean, we do know, we consider the fact that it doesn't mean that people will commit suicide automatically. Sit down. We don't think so. But at least once you actually once you actually propagate this form of ideologies, this form of information, it is a direct form of subliminal messaging to these people in the first place. It's direct coercion given by this media. Second thing that I'm going to do to you is how this motion actually decreases suicidal cases. Firstly, in the contrary, let us look, the news are just so uncontrollable and it is easily accessible in the first place. Not only those people in the grey area, but also those people who have suicidal tendencies. This motion is to conform to these people, especially towards these people who have suicidal tendencies in the first place. We believe, before even an individual to actually commit suicide, they need a triggering factor. They need a factor to actually make them commit suicide in the first place. And we believe this media is one of those triggering factors that actually made them to commit suicide. Secondly, this is the exact push that they need to actually commit suicide. We want to prevent that. We want to prevent this whole idea of having this exact push or this exact motivation for them to go through this kind of activity in the first place. Thirdly, before moving on, yes, last one.
Characterization, exactly why people commit suicide. Your generalization is not true. People have external factors such as bullying, discrimination, How is it? You have to prove us how disregarding those problems lead to them not committing suicide and not facing the same problem.
We are not disregarding all those problems in the environment. We do believe those environments are in existence, but the fact of the matter is this media is only the helping factor to those factors in the first place. Those are the ones, those may be the causes of suicide, but the main push or the main motivation for that person to actually commit suicide in the first place is the media that actually promotes other people and shows other people and exposes these people to other people that has committed suicide in the first place. So therefore, it's direct coercion, it's direct influence, and we believe that is the major harm in today's case. Thirdly, how are we going to protect the image of the family? Firstly, it's a breach of the rights of privacy since you already report on these instances of suicide in the first place. We believe it's a breach of rights of privacy. Sit down. Even if these people consent to it in the first place, we believe it harms their own dignity, as they are the ones who actually have, maybe the people doesn't know what were the underlying factor that they had actually undergone to actually commit a suicide. Secondly, the nature of media being a sensation in the first place. Media always exaggerates and always sensationalizes this kind of information, not really portraying the real information, why they actually commit suicide or why did he actually go through this form of activity or this form of behavior. We believe this disclosure of information is really harmed if we don't ban this form of media in the first place. Thirdly, the stigmatization towards the family of these individuals in the first place. We believe stigmatization would only be amplified once you actually report on the suicidal cases. Maybe they didn't conform to this form of choices, but we believe once you actually allow this government, this media to report on these cases, you only amplify the whole idea of stigmatization, like exactly what happened in status quo. We believe we are trying to protect all those, and we believe we are trying to promote what's in the best interest of society. We believe government stands to this debate.
We thank the Prime Minister for his speech. He spoke for 7 minutes and 3 seconds. We would now like to call upon the Leader of Opposition to take the floor.
It was a lie for side government to tell you that media can publish news of victims of suicide without consent of family. That's an extreme lie, because we tell that in status quo, they do ask family members whether they can get the permission to publish those kind of news on the news. That's why we think that their idea is completely out. But secondly, we reject their characterization when they condemn people that commit suicide as irrational people. That's so discriminatory coming from you. We think that they fail to recognize the extreme external factors that is inflicted onto these individuals. That these individuals are necessarily irrational, that they were affected by those external factors in which you completely disregarded. There are two principles in which our side stands for. Firstly, the ability of the press to shape the narratives of society when it comes to suicide. You can create better understanding of the nature of suicide. And secondly, the discourse of a particular problem leads to better outcome rather than complete disregard of that particular problem. Before I move into my substantive, which revolves around these two principles, let's look at 2 points of rebuttals that weren't integrated into my substantive. So firstly, they talk about how it's okay to restrict the right of information, especially when it comes to this kind of news. Look, we tell you that there's supposed to be absolute freedom of press for these kind of people, meaning to say that these kind of newspapers should have no prior restraint and no fear to publish those kind of news in the first place. But secondly, we tell that they have no right to limit this kind of right to publish, because there's no direct tangible harms that happen within this. So that clearly shows that they never understand it. But secondly, we told you how it becomes a stereotype on how to actually commit suicide if you publish it in newspapers like CNN or whatsoever. We tell that, look, if that is their premise, the individuals can still get ideas of how to commit suicide on Google. Like they can just do it randomly on the internet anytime. Are they going to ban that? Sure. Are they still going to ban that? Those kind of ideas? We don't really get what they are talking. All right, into my substantive with integrated rebuttals. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how the press is performing a form of social duty. Secondly, the significance of the disease of the disease extends towards the communities involved, and thirdly, how it gives credence of hope and support to individuals facing that same particular problem. Before I move on, yes.
Even if a consent was given, this information being leaked, don't you think the influence still exists with people who are emotionally upset?
Right, that will come into my third question, which is why individuals who are facing the same particular problem will feel more united, that they feel that they are not the only one alone and they can get help. So watch this space. First argument, why the press is performing a form of social duty when it comes to reporting. Because we tell you that we have to understand the nature in the status quo. That firstly, every news centrals paint suicide in the worst light possible. Because they want, and they draw links of suicide to bullying, to social exclusion, etc. They publish exactly what caused the victim to actually commit suicide. But secondly, the press also publish suicide hotlines at the bottom of the screen when reporting. This directly tells you that the press puts direct recognition of the problem that individuals who are facing those kind of suicidal thoughts, that they are not alone, that if they do need help and they see another person commit suicide, there's a hotline for them to get those kind of help that they truly need. But moreover, we also tell you why it's extremely important for societal views on suicide. Because we have to understand that the psyche of society, that people keep viewing victims of suicide as irrational individuals, which was something that they really pushed for from the get-go. We tell you that these are extremely harmful towards the disease, because you never understand what truly caused their death. You never truly understand the external factors that cause him to resort to suicide, Mr. Speaker. We tell that there is a need in the form of counter-rhetoric to change that particular social norms that exist within society. We tell that the media always recognizes the external force that caused that individual's death. The conclusion of this argument is simple, that we think that the press is extremely effective when it comes to curbing issues like suicides, because it paints it in the worst light possible so that individuals will understand the particular problem and the external factors that causes this kind of suicide cases. Sit down. On to my second argument, which is the significance on the disease to an extent towards communities involved. Because firstly, we have to understand that the value to that life of a victim is important. We tell that the families hold these victims very intrinsically, that the family recognize the values of their loved one, and we tell that the press directly recognize that value of life. That's why they publish the news that's why they publish that kind of news in the news center. And this directly clashes on their idea on stigmatization. Because we tell that under our side, it extends support to a larger scale towards the family involved. Because we show you, we clearly under the status quo, we show you that we support the families in which are having loved ones committing suicide. Because people will now understand that the true causes of the suicide was not that individual itself, but it was the external forces that caused him to commit suicide. Without that, under our policy, lesser rumors would also spread. Because we have to be clear, that in status quo, people always spread rumors like, why this guy suddenly committed suicide. Without under our side, when the media directly publishes external factors and the psyche of the victim, that's when lesser rumors will spread. Because the media is scrutinized to publish what exactly happened, in which we clearly told you in our POI that media always have to put the truth in the news. Because if it doesn't, then there will be public scrutiny for them changing the kind of news. So yeah, onto my third argument, which is why it gives credence of hope and support to individuals facing the same problem, which directly clashes on their idea on motivation for people to suicide. Because once again, let's acknowledge and understand the nature in status quo. That sure, suicidal people exist in society, in which many people are on the verge of committing suicide. And it's important for media to publish all this kind of news, because it gives more credence of this kind of individuals facing that same particular problem to voice out. Because we have to understand that suicide victims always feel that they are alone in the world. When you publish those kind of news, they know they are not alone in this world that's facing that kind of particular problem. They realize that somebody else has the exact same problem with them. And we tell you that under our policy, it can trivialize the nature of suicide. We tell you that it's no more that a suicidal thought becomes the arbiter of the death, because people would now recognize the external factors that cause these kind of people, which also extends help towards these people. And people with suicidal thought realizes that society exactly recognize their problem and not going to scrutinize them even more. Mr. Speaker, suicide is a problem that affects all of us. We have to do what's best for them. For all those reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
Right. We thank the leader of opposition for his speech. He spoke for 7 minutes and 24 seconds. We would now like to call for the Deputy Prime Minister to take the floor here.
Ladies and gentlemen, opposition predicated one of their arguments upon rights to publish information. With that, ladies and gentlemen, they still haven't clarified to the House why exactly this news is important to status quo. They gave a few assumptions that we tell you are logical leaps that we are going to cater to at the end of today's debate. But more importantly, right, they question the rights to publish news and the rights to publish information about people being suicidal, and they tell us that's not harmful. We told you 3 explicit harms that we don't want to spread. Firstly, on the excessive harms that you inflict on yourself. Secondly, the dignity that you screw up of yourself in the eyes of other people. Also, how you create a stereotype as for everyone as to think that this is the result or this is the way to exit all your problems, right? This is the coercion that social media puts. Because we tell you, the fact is, social media or media to begin with, be it news or on the radio or magazines or things like that, these are the kinds of things that are so easily accessible, ladies and gentlemen. This is wherever you turn, there's probably a TV that's showing the news about a person who is being suicidal. We tell you that this is where this coercion happens, especially to emotionally unstable people. We tell you that this is extremely harmful. Therefore, we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we don't want this idea of coercion to happen and cater to the idea of suicide being the exit route for everyone who's having a problem. Sit down. Also, ladies and gentlemen, they came up with a rebuttal here. They told us how in status quo, if a news would be published about a person committing suicide, there is a need for consent. Yes, even if they were to give consent, we tell you that this sense of coercion still happens, and we tell you the government still needs to regulate this because of the idea of the excessive suicidal cases that do exist. So we tell you it's extremely harmful towards these individuals who are emotionally unstable, right? No. But also, on the third issue, on the social duty, right? They tell us exactly how on news, they have hotlines and things, right? But ladies and gentlemen, let's come to the reality here, right? People who are emotionally unstable, the only thing they see on news is a person committing suicide, and they tell you, and that the news says that this is what he did to exit his problems. People don't take the tendency to go and call those cell phone numbers, because look, the first impression they get on the news is that someone who has a mutual interest and who is undergoing the same problems as me has resorted to these certain moves. So we tell you that this is the first impression that is embedded in the minds of these emotionally unstable people, and we tell you that's where the tendency for suicide is extremely harmful to that sense. Yes, defend yourself.
The media paints the family crying after the person did a provoked suicide. How is the logical link that individuals see that painted light in such a horrible light was to condone the act of suicide?
Ladies and gentlemen, the moment someone thinks about acting in suicide, they already put aside every other thing that exists on this world, including how their family feels. Because, ladies and gentlemen, everyone knows that your family will be sad if you die, but the point here is they think that their problems outweigh the reaction of their parents. No. But more importantly, that's what we think will happen under their paradigm, right? But also, Kenneth tried to talk about how the news puts suicide in a bad light, right? But wait a minute, as much as they put it in a bad light, they don't exactly tell you why is it so harmful for you to resort to suicide. So we tell you there's no realization that you instill during use. But more importantly, and the most absurd argument coming from him, is that how they want to pull all these people who are suicidal in nature and you want to attract them just by news. They're telling you that they want to bring together everyone who has suicidal tendencies by showing them a picture of a person who had the same problem but resorted to suicide, ladies and gentlemen. This just pulls everyone to the same conclusion that suicide is the answer. We tell you that that's never fair, and we tell you that that's exactly going to exacerbate the problem of suicide being spread out, right? So let's move on to our argumentations coming from side government, which we're going to prove to you that this motion is in the best interest of society. So my first argumentation on how it harms the sensitivity of affected people. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to concede to the fact that when it comes to suicide, it's not just the individual who commits suicide that's affected, it's the people around them, right? But more importantly, we also need to understand that media sensationalizes these cases, and we tell you that even after their loved ones who have committed suicide have already committed suicide, when there comes a case again a few weeks after, a few months after, a few years after, that reminds them of a case of suicide, this is when they feel as though they're reminded of the nostalgic event that had taken place, right? But why is this exclusively harmful when we talk about suicide? Because when it comes to suicide and when it comes to family members, we need to also understand that family members always feel they have the responsibility to consult their loved ones and actually understand the problems that they're facing, right? But in this paradigm, when someone commits suicide, these are the family members who feel that they failed in committing responsibility in really talking and rehabilitating these troubled people. We tell you that this is where they feel as though the sense of guilt that they keep reminded of every time the suicidal case comes on. So we tell you this is extremely harmful to these people, right? Because, ladies and gentlemen, you victimize family members with mental torture as means to get income. We tell you that's never fair and that's highly immoral, right? Side opposition needs to prove to us how it's completely fair for you to ruin the minds of torture these individuals who have their family members committed suicide and they couldn't do anything about it. Now, side opposition needs to prove how there's a valid playing field for them to achieve or get income and how they're going to exploit that information for that. We thought that's extremely helpful. Yes, Yongshen.
Okay, considering you already considered the fact that you need a parent's consent before publishing any news about it, that means that parents will use that to help themselves rehabilitate and create catharsis for those suicides.
Okay, if I, as a parent, I'm okay with the information about my child being suicidal be passed on to the news, what about my neighbor who also has a child that committed suicide? We tell you that this also affects my neighbor, ladies and gentlemen, because look, now he's also affected by the immorality that my son has undergone and how the government has shown this across the world, and how they spread to the message that these routes of exiting your problems do exist and how it's taken by many individuals. We thought that's extremely harmful to all these people who do have family members who are victimized by suicide. So we thought that's never fair for these individuals, and we tell you that we take the moral high ground into this debate, where we provide you a security for those people who are affected by suicide, be it because of their family members resorting to suicide or because even they have a sensitivity towards this kind of cases, right? So what have we told you in today's debate? We propagate the idea that we want to protect the image of these individuals or of these families who actually do have their family members commit suicide, and also we tell you how we want to decrease the number of suicidal cases inevitably because we restrict the idea of an easily accessible medium to actually coerce them into committing or self-inflicting this form of harms that do exist when they turn to suicide. We also tell you that government has every right to protect individuals who are affected and unaffected. So at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, side government completely takes this debate.
We thank the Deputy Prime Minister for the speech. Spoke for 7 minutes and 9 seconds. And now we'd like to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to take the floor here.
Lost, hopeless, and dark. You feel trapped. And you wake up every day and you think about why are you even still alive and why do I continue living? And then you go on the news, and you go on the NBC and BBC and you read about all the other people who have committed suicide. Paired with the testimonials of their parents and the people who love them, who actively say that yes, this person was a part of my life. And I don't think that he should have killed himself or herself. And this person was an important part in my life, right? And we think that anybody out there who is suicidal right now should come and find help and talk to us about it. These are the type of things that they actively restrict in status quo right now, right? And this is what we want to change. They actively restrict the counter-narrative that can exist from people who have actually had children who committed suicide or any family members who committed suicide to tell or post on the news, no, don't commit suicide. You are actively committing a harm towards not only yourself, but all the people that love you. And these are a very strong emotional calculuses that you put into newspapers and media itself. And this changes the narrative and it changes the perception and psyche of suicidal people themselves. Because now when they see it, they actually say that, oh, okay, I have more things to think about. I don't want to hurt my family and things like that. We think that this is extremely important in understanding. This is why side opposition wants to institute this. Right? We need to provide a counter-narrative to ensure that people on the ground, suicidal people themselves, know that this isn't the right way to handle their problems, and without this, this will be more harmful. Sit down, I just started. There are two things I'm going to tell you today. One, how you affect the psyche of suicidal people in a positive manner. But two, how doing this on the media itself is going to cause an act for change so that more policies or actions can be instituted so that less people commit suicide. And this will clash very nicely with their ideas in itself. But before I move on to that, let's look at a few rebuttals that I couldn't integrate. One, on their idea of glorification and whether media is actually doing it. No, the first ever analysis is no, they're not actually doing that. If you actively promote suicidal hotlines underneath those articles themselves, which is status quo by the way, this actively shows that the media itself is upholding their responsibility and upholding the government's values and saying that suicide is bad. They never once in their whole lifetime in the media that they can even tell us that yes, or the media actively says that, oh, committing suicide is a good thing. That really shows there is no glorification out there. But secondly, on the checks and balances that are already there, parents already need to have the consent, and family members and newspapers have to get family members' consent as well. This shows that this actively goes against whatever idea they have about harming family members in itself. We thought that's even better under our paradigm, where family members can choose to use the media as a tool to get the form of catharsis that they need, or the form of support that they need to overcome such a harmful imperative that is done towards them. Sit down, okay? But thirdly, let's go into the idea about suing, right? This third level rebuttal. Obviously, if you glorify something or you post any information that actively defames your son or causes harm towards your family, you can sue those newspapers itself. These are not checks and balances and shows that newspapers or media out there cannot use this to glorify suicide. But secondly, on the idea of subliminal messaging and coercion, fine. Look, on the first level rebuttal, do you think this even works? Like, do you even think that everything you read on the newspapers in themselves, you believe? We don't think so, right? Secondly, hello, that's exactly going against your idea. But even if this subliminal message did occur, we think the narrative and awareness that you create is more important because you save more lives compared towards them, right? We think that when you actively put on the media itself that yes, this isn't a way you should be doing things about it, when you actually promote and highlight the forms of problems that the suicidal person faced, you can actually change the perception and fix those problems and themselves, right? Okay, so moving to my ideas, but before I move on, yeah, any PRs?
Sure. If it's true that family reaction is a deterrent factor when they want to commit suicide, prove to us why their problems don't really counter the family reaction.
I'm sorry, I don't think you really understand what we're trying to say. We are telling you right now that if families, right, want to use the media as a tool, they can. We're not saying that families will have an active problem towards that, right? But before, okay, fine. let me go on anyway, right? On the idea of other families getting harmed in themselves, or your family, your family had someone who committed suicide, you don't want to see because it constantly reminds you of the guilt. Hello, but the comparison is here, right? You're actively preventing future people from stopping that suicide, right? Because you're not even telling them how to stop or the warning signs of those suicidal people themselves. You never allow that counter narrative to exist. You further harm and you create more people with families who have suicide, right? Okay, let's go into my substantives. First, on the idea of suicidal people, how it affects their psyche in a positive manner. The problem right now is that suicidal people themselves don't actually want to commit suicide. We say most of them don't actually want to commit suicide, right? That they are only pushed towards committing suicide when it's really ultimately they feel that there's nothing working for them, right? But how do we change that? And how do we insert at least a barrier for them to know that there's someone helping them, right? It's when you use the media themselves. When you go on Reddit, when you go on BBC, and actively see people talking about it, right? Say that, no, don't commit suicide, come talk to me about your problems, right? And these are the things that actually happen in the media itself. We think that this affects and allows for suicidal people to control and maybe inhibit themselves from committing that suicide. We think this is a good thing that can only happen when you allow media to portray it, and there's a marginal benefit on the outside. But secondly, let's look on the ideas of acts of change themselves, because this is extremely important. Look, there are a lot of reasons why people want to commit suicide. Look, there are things like bullying, there are things like forms of coercion or stereotypes that are being put upon themselves. We think this is extremely harmful, but how do you also magnify these problems and change the perception of society so that they can change these problems? It's through media as well. You need to understand that when this happens, when you allow for people to use media to do this, because the social policies that are enacted are affected by the amount of knowledge people know about the situation. Without that knowledge, you cannot change policies, or you cannot institute or use the uproar that you get to make sure that people in the future don't commit that suicide. And this clashes very nicely with the idea about glorifying suicide, people committing more. But in actuality, it's not. So the conclusion to this argument is very simple. That when you do this, and you actually allow media to do this, you institute a change in policy, right? So the problem in today's society is that suicide needs a change. But without the media, there can be no change.
We'd like to thank the leader of opposition for his speech for 7 minutes and 15 seconds. Right now, we'd like to invite the government whip to wrap up the substantive side of government speech. Here.
Mr. Speaker, there are certain things that opposition side do not understand to this debate. Firstly, of course, we want society to know how bad suicide is, but then how should we tell the society how bad suicide is? Do we need media to report on cases of suicide to really tell society that suicide is bad? It's never mutually exclusive. We have so many other ways to tell and educate society that suicide is not a good thing, but that we never see the dire need for us to expose the whole reason, the whole case, the whole controversial issue of an individual committing suicide, therefore thoroughly and tarnishing the image of the family of the victim itself. We tell you, is that necessary? We tell you, is it necessary for you to breach the privacy of this family to be questioned by so many media companies to now tell what's in the news? We tell you this is never necessary. Number one, what family of victims don't consent to? Sure, they can, if there are families who consent for their information to be published, but then we don't think that this family consent to spice up stories, because you have to consider the fact that the moment it is spread to the news, there will be no stop and it's totally irreversible. Sit down. Because you are going to, these people are going to be questioned by so many people, so many media press to actually know what's the real story. And there's so many versions will come out. We tell you this is not what the family of the victim consent to. We tell you the rights to comfortability is tarnished, the rights to privacy is tarnished under this policy. They never consent for their rights to comfortability to actually be tarnished. For example, if my brother committed suicide, and if my parents consent to give the information to be published, we tell you we never consent to the actions of media company to keep questioning me the reasons why my brother killed himself. Those kind of questions, those kind of sensitive issues were never what I consented to tell these people. We never think this is fair. Number two, why media companies does not have the rights to publish? They still fight for these companies. We tell you there is direct harm, and we tell you there's no immorality for you to gain profit, to make money out of someone's death. We tell you it's totally immoral for you to do so. Even if the parents consent to, they don't consent to such harms. There is direct harm. For example, the family of the victim and suicide. You harm their image. We clearly state in Prime Minister. You harm their emotion. We clearly state in our second speaker. We tell you the side of opposition never engaged us, never show why reporting on media will not harm the image of the family. They never showed to us why this action of reporting suicide case will never harm the emotion and the sensitivity that we have. They never tried to engage to our arguments at all. But regardless of that, we argue to you that it also harms the grey area. And this is the core of the debate, whether we can demotivate or dissuade these people to do suicide or not. But I'll tell you later on that issue, right? And then what's the best way to create understanding of suicide? Sure, the leader of opposition want to create understanding of suicide. The problem right now is reporting on suicide case is not the only way to create understanding of suicide. We tell you, do we really need to expose these suicide cases to public for public to understand how bad the situation is? We don't think it's necessary. We can still go to education. We can still go to a lot of things that government can do to tell this public that suicide is bad. Especially when you're targeting these people who have the tendency to do suicide. Is it the best way? We don't think so. Let me tell you. For example, let me tell you, the leader of opposition told you, you don't necessarily believe in news. Exactly. You don't necessarily read things and believe. Look, if suicide people, you have to consider the fact that suicidal people does not have the same background. What if their family is the reason they want to commit suicide itself? And then the whole thing, the whole sentiments of the deputy leader of opposition on how the family give testimonials, I think it's very bad for them to kill themselves. He was part of my life. Now become counterproductive because these people believe that now they will not compare their families with the families that gave those testimonials. Will their family do the same thing if he or her kill herself or himself? We tell you this is going to tarnish the problem, and this is going to exacerbate the problem on the ground. We tell you shouldn't make these suicidal people who are having the tendency to commit suicide to compare themselves, their situation with other people's situation. We tell you, you are going to tarnish that, you are going to exacerbate the problem because this comparison will lead to them thinking that their situation is worse than that. It's not the same. Probably this kid killed himself and his family regret that idea. But then my family don't really take care of me. I want to die because my family doesn't want to care about me. What about that then? But before I move on, yes.
Okay, look. It's not about that people look at it and suddenly feel like, oh, I want to commit suicide because my family doesn't care about me. Now they can actively see that, yes, what happens now is that if I commit suicide, people know and understand what's happening to me. And if I do it, it hurts my family. Do I actually want to hurt my family?
Sure, you don't want to hurt your family, you yourself, but not all suicidal people has the same emotion as you. Some people who want to commit suicide because they think that their family is just not good enough to take care of them, and they think they can't because their families hurt them too much. Now they have to do something to stop their families from hurting them. We tell you these cases is totally backlash with this action at the end of the day. And then we tell you the question to this debate is how can we dissuade grey area individual? We can use media, of course, ladies and gentlemen, but let's look at this question, right? Why can't we just provide a medium or a governmental office or whatever to just tell people, hey, we are here to help you? Why do we need these articles, this news to be exposed first, then at the end of the article, then only you put hotline numbers? Why is that necessary? We question their credibility, we question their morality. Why do we need to expose the whole thing? Why do we need to open a medium for this family of victims to be abused, to be questioned by so many people at the end of the day? We tell you it does not bring any benefits, and it does not benefit this family of victims at all. It does not tell the society exclusively that suicide is bad. At the end of the day, government takes to this debate clearly. Why? We told you we want to ban reporting on suicide case. We don't want media to report on this because of certain reasons. Number one, we believe that this is an immoral act of breaching rights to privacy. We told you that the morality of media's reporting suicide case for money is totally questionable and side of opposition. Never tried to argue why it's morally okay for this media to gain profit, to gain money for the sake, in the event of someone's death. Do you think, really, that media companies do these articles, post these articles for the sake of charity? We don't think so. Other than that, we told you clearly how we throw bad mindset, bad ideas for this grey people area who has tendency to not compare themselves, to not commit suicide, to not be more likely to commit suicide. For all those very reasons, ladies and gentlemen, we are very proud to say that we are proud to ban big media that reporting on suicide. For all the reasons, we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
Great. We'd like to thank the government for its speech. Spoke for 7 minutes and 4 seconds. And now to wrap up the substantive part of the opposition's case, we'd like to call upon the opposition to take the floor.
That side of the house need to realize one thing. The moment you remove any media coverage on suicide that happens upon people, you also put the idea and the problems that come with suicide into the shadow. Which means to say, the state and the people on the ground disregard every situation, disregard every external factors that happens to those individuals. Which means to say, you allow those individuals to internalize the problem that go through with them with no external support from society, with no external support, with no understanding towards the situation they go for. The norm that is perpetrated within society is extremely simple. That these individuals, which they say themselves in the PM, these individuals are irrational beings, they are depressed, they cannot get out of depression. The problem with this continuous norm being perpetrated is you don't give a counter narrative, which is the press, to allow you to actually understand the situation that every diversity of suicidal individual go through. You will never want to push them to that situation of harm. Two issues into this debate. Number one, the repercussions to the communities involved. But number two, what is the actual role of the media and why it's extremely important towards societal narratives. On my first issue, sit down. The authority of the media and what is the actuality that they play. Number one, they contended to us that there is obvious reasons for them to exaggerate the situation to the largest extent to get views. That's the exact problem. We don't think it's exaggerated to the problem of lies because there's check and balances within the system that protects and it hinders those situations. But number two, there's also another check and balance besides the law, which is society. In a situation where the media is corrupted, we think those situations is enough of a hindrance towards the media coverage. Because the moment society reacts to your lies, that also means that the media coverage loses views, loses leverage, and loses our income. That's why they won't ever perpetrate lies. But secondly, sit down. We think that the media acts for social duty. Why do they report news? Their simplistic characterization to why media reports news cannot be brought into this debate. The reason why, even if it's to gain views, we think that it's the actuality of situation, media does it to get the holistic view of the situation. Which means to say that not only do you report the happenings, the media is also there to act as social duty to point out the causes. Because if you only report the surface of the news, nobody's going to buy into your ideas. Nobody's going to want to watch the media. That's why BBC and CNN always find out the cause before reporting the happenings. We think those things are important for you to garner those views, so we concede to what they say. But thirdly, we also think that even if it's only to gain views, that proves our characterization true. Because the only way you want to gain news is the fact that you have to be holistic and you have to prove to us more than just the happening that happened. Because people want to understand and internalize their situation within the media, provide them those narratives. But fourthly, we also think that also means they have the incentive to dig up the actuality of the news more than just the surface before they publish it. That's how you gain views. That's how you garner profit, because you're the media that provides the most amount of news. But then let's look at the idea that they came up with the whip. They said there's various situations that be perpetrated by that particular family. We don't think there's a problem, because as long as it's perpetrated, the very same principle still stands, that that individual faced harm, that individual was bullied to the extent of suicide. That's extremely important for us to paint by every media. We don't care about the diversity. Before I move on, yes.
The moment the information is released, the harm is totally irreversible. What happened to Samina? Don't you think we should err on the side of caution rather than react?
But then, that's an assumption that families don't consent to this. The very idea of consent is important, because that means that family wants to actualize the fact that their family member, who they love so dearly, had to be exposed and force out the truth that goes on. That's why family consent to having their family members, the deceased, published, because they want to know, they want the public to know that my family faced a situation that has to be stopped within society. But second idea of societal narratives, which something Yongshan talked about, is completely discarded for them. We want the discourse to happen, because current norms is narrative perpetrated that suicidal people are irrational, they rash, they cannot get out of depression. That's the stereotype that exactly they talked about, and those stereotypes still exist. So the harms of removing news is you have no counter towards that narrative, because we think that you aggravate the situation and the individual stereotype of being irrational beings when you don't necessarily publish why they are irrational in the first place. But secondly, we also think that recognizing the problem also leads to discourse for the individuals, and putting them in the shadow is extreme harm that we would not talk to them. Because the moment you put shadows towards the problems they face, such as bullying, you also lock these people out of the closet, because society don't know the problems they face, society cannot understand, that's why they lock themselves in the closet. But fourthly, let's look at the idea of what happens when you put this upon people. What happens is, number one, the idea on how we can't just extend help to them. The reason why help doesn't exist with media coverage is, number one, when government actively takes away the importance of you and the importance of suicide, exactly what Canon talked about. That's when you disregard these people, and there's no incentive for you to perpetrate help and change policies. But secondly, we also think that help involves within people. The reason there's campaigns is because people run those campaigns, and the only reason why people run those campaigns is because people understand that bullying happens, we need to stop the situation. Second issue for today's debate, the repercussions of the community involved sit down. Number one, when it comes to family dignity, their idea, we think that consent already exists. And the reason why consent is important because it shows that family members are interested in exposing and invested interest in exposing their family members' livelihood and their significance when they were alive. But secondly, even if consent didn't exist, we don't think coercion takes place, because family members is extremely important to those individuals. We think those rational calculus can be made. But thirdly, we also think that family dignity is elevated in this situation when they put in media, because the support and societal structure support goes towards them is extremely important, because the press is there to be the check and balance, to remove rumors and extreme assumptions that happen when it comes to suicide. Exactly what Kenneth talked about. When a moment someone in your neighborhood commits suicide, there's a lot of rumors that will go around. Who is there to then counterbalance those situations? We think the media plays to sit down. But secondly, we also think that societal reaction, something they talked about. They said that the neighbor who faced the exact same situation will feel hurt. We don't think so. We think that the problem is the other individuals who also face the same problem. They will be granted the closure towards themselves, because they finally see that other individuals also face the exact same problem that I did. But secondly, on the idea of neighbor, we also think it's a societal support, because another family face the same situation you face, you can grant them societal support. We don't think harm goes to them. But secondly, let's look at the idea of suicidal people. Government painted to us picture a very logical link that it leads to them being influence towards committing suicide. Number one, that's based on the assumption that media gives glory and puts a crown upon people who are deceased and who committed suicide. We don't think so. We think actually the media portrays families crying, shock reaction, emotional damages that come with suicide. That's the exact narrative that's being sent to the suicidal people on the ground, because it helps them visualize the outcome, helps them to necessarily understand the situation and understand what happens if they actually committed suicide. And those are the harmful outcomes that we want to be painted in today's debate. But number two, we also think that their side pushes for condoning of the act. Because number one, the moment you make suicide something that's taboo, the moment you disregard all the problems, that is when suicidal people on the ground realize that nobody understands my problem. Suicide is the only answer I have to go for. And even if they want to argue help, we don't think society will be having the incentive to give them help. Because the reason why is because you never allow exposure for the problems that these people go through. You disregard them as a whole. But fourthly, on the rebuttal of the new method that came up from government, what if the family is the reason why they want to commit suicide? Number one, that means that there's abuse. That means that it's against criminal law. We don't need freaking consent to publish it. We think that's also better for us, because then you allow shaming of the family who caused the suicide of the deceased. It's not a problem in today's debate. With all these reasons, we take this debate.
didn't do it for a speech, he spoke for 7 minutes and 22 seconds. So, to wrap up the opposition match as a whole, we're now going to talk about opposition rights.
Three reasons why we win today's debate. One, we prove to you why the media, and only the media, has an objective benefit in allowing and ensuring that suicidal people will not commit suicide and prevent them from doing it. Secondly, we tell you that the media is probably the best way and the best actor to allow for public awareness and change in public policies that allow for suicidal people to get help. But lastly, on also the idea of suicidal people themselves and the idea of consent. Look, okay, I'm going to start off with consent because apparently this is something really big in opposition in government's case, right? Look, they never understood that consent, and when families do consent towards it, means that they also consent towards the heart. And this was already started off from Kenneth itself. They never wanted to respond towards that. Right? Or they were like, oh, rights of privacy, you know, even if you already consented to giving that privacy away. You don't see that's a harm there. But secondly, they also told us about this idea about, is it morally okay for newspapers to gain a benefit towards this, gain a profit from reporting this incident? Right? We already conceded towards that, right? And we told you multiple reasons why. We told you that newspapers themselves and media in general give counter narratives and also supports the idea going against the glorification of suicide. They are actively telling people on the ground that suicide is bad, you should go find help if you feel any of this. Right? They are never once contended to that characterization, they lose that point. But secondly, they also didn't understand the comparison here. Because if you do allow this on media, and this wouldn't work under education or what else, because media was the most accessible, is that people who are suicidal won't see the testimonials and the emotional damage that can actually happen when you commit suicide towards your own family. And this is something that does inhibit a lot of people who are suicidal from committing that act, because now they know and they can evaluate all the harm they will commit towards their family. We think that a lot of people have the rational calculus themselves. That, hey, you know, if I'm going to cause such a huge harm, I might rethink what I'm going to do. We think that this is even better. But lastly, they never responded to the characterization and the argument that came out from Kenneth about saying that, what if people themselves and families themselves who have people who committed suicide want to use media to gain support, right? And to gain catharsis over that. They can actively use the media to garner and say, yeah, this is what happened to my family, I want to change this, I want to change the things that allow these things to happen, let's do it, right? So they never responded to that. We take the idea of consent, also the idea of catharsis. But secondly, let's look at suicidal people themselves. And this is something we don't understand for them. Because it's a very big logical leap, saying that, oh, if you suddenly read about suicide in the newspaper, you suddenly want to commit suicide. Right? We don't think that they factor in all the emotional damages that we told you about. We don't think they factored in all the rational calculus when you read about these things on the newspaper. And people actually provide you alternatives on how to solve your problems in themselves. Right? We think that this idea is irrational coming from them. Right? And they will obviously not understand that committing suicide is a very big act. And that everyone thinks about it before they do it. Right? When you add more barriers towards that, when you allow more counter-narratives to exist, you also allow more likelihood that that person will not commit that act in itself. But lastly, let's go to public policy. And this is something very important and something they also never wanted to respond to, right? Public policy is debated upon the media, right? And this isn't only in education classes, right? We're talking about wide scale, on the TV, on the internet, right? And these are the things that actively affect the perceptions and awareness of people themselves. And they didn't respond to that at all, right? Oh, they skirted around and said that, oh, you know, like, you can use the education. But the problem is that education doesn't reach a wide enough society to change anything, right? We need to use the media because this means that more people will understand and see what is actually happening in real life, right? They are exacerbating every form of idea to prevent the committing of suicide, right? We take today's debate.
Whoever that was will call you back later. Right, so we thank the opposition reply for the speech. We spoke for 4 minutes and 5 seconds. And now, to wrap up the material from the government side of the House and the debate as a whole, and the one government reply speaker here.
person who's suicidal, ladies and gentlemen, these are the people who have left everything behind in life. They have no hope to life, and they have no hope to continue with life, right? These are the people who go to the news, see people committing suicide, and based on opposition's characterization, there's a hotline for them to call. Okay, they call the hotline, but what happens then? They get 5 minutes of heaven when the hotline, or the person on the hotline says, look, there's more to life. You can do better than this. And then they drop the phone, they continue with their life, and they realize that their life is not as good. And then they're on the news again, and they see another person commit suicide. We tell you that the interpretation that they get on this message is to commit suicide because that's the route that everyone else is taking. This is the characterization of the problem, and we tell you this is where suicidal cases come from. We tell you that this is the coercion that exists because of the symmetry of influence that media has. So we tell you at the end of the day, we provide a better decrease in suicidal cases. But also, what they try to tell us, suicidal cases are put to silent under our paradigm. That's not what we think. We told you under our paradigm that as much as it does go silent, no, we tell you that if it goes silent still, we tell you that under their paradigm, if they want to highlight a certain harm that exists to more individuals, we tell you that's never fair, and we tell you that it doesn't really go silent because we give you alternatives. Oh, education is always the best purpose. And even if it does go silent, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that your parents are always there to educate you, and you have people around you to tell you that this is not good. So we tell you the idea of suicide going silent is never there. But also, at the end of the day, where's the moral principles and who takes the moral high ground? They told us how when you give consent to your information being leaked, that's fine, because that's not harming your moral values. So we told you that is it morally right for them to actually exploit this information? Because, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that even if this consent happens, we tell you that it's never morally justified for this consent to be exploited with income. Then this is what their response was, right? It forms a counter narrative to actually counter the act of suicide. But still, we tell you that should this gamble of actually creating counter narrative outweigh the moral principles that we all uphold? Because, ladies and gentlemen, they came up with the assumption as to say that it is a counter narrative. But we told you explicitly in all argumentations that this counter narrative doesn't work. We tell you it's a visceral reaction to the problem, and it's a visceral reaction to them putting everything in their life behind because they're suicidal. We tell you that it is counterintuitive and it doesn't work also. But lastly, right, who protects the families that are affected? They failed to engage in this argumentation because they failed to agree that, look, the people who are in trouble or who have their family members commit suicide, these are the people who are going to be affected because they're reminded of the nostalgic event where they couldn't do anything in the event of their family members committing suicide. And they failed in their responsibility of a family member to cater and rehabilitate to the person who committed suicide. We tell you that this is where we protect these individuals who do feel sensitive over this issue. But moreover, let's see what government tried to tell you. We told you 5 things. Firstly, how is an infringement of right to privacy of these families, even if they consented the arrangement. Secondly, we tell you how it's completely immoral for the media to exploit this information, even when consent is given. It contradicts the moral principles that everyone, the government especially, goes by. Also, we tell you how it propagates a bad mindset or a bad idea towards these emotionally unstable people because they see this as a room or an exit door to all their problems in life. We also tell you how we want to protect the image of the family, how they get stigmatized by society at the end of the day and committing this mental pressure towards them. And we also tell you how we don't want to remind families who have their family members commit suicide of the nostalgic events when they are reminded of their failure as a family member to cater to these individuals. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, lack of responses to our argumentations and side government completely takes this debate.
Thank you so much for this debate.